Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about changes in communication skills before and after study abroad experience as measured by a study abroad assessments test. My name is Hana Tsukada from the International Student and Study Abroad Advising Office at the Hitotsubashi University.
And I am Jin Abe. I work with Hanae in the same office.
Today we are going to talk about these three topics. So students bring a lot of questions to our office, and then they wonder what would be the benefits of going study abroad, and how do we explain? And there should be many reasons and purposes for going study abroad, but how would we explain the reason or purpose of study abroad?
Right. Many of our advisees are undergraduate students, some graduate, but mostly undergraduate. So I'm going to focus on them as our primary clients. When they come first, they would be more academically oriented. Let's say I'm a marketing major and I want to study digital marketing at A and B and C university, and that's their mindset. Whereas we have experienced study abroad, and I'm sure many of you have as well. There are a lot of different things that you can pick up in undergraduate study abroad experiences other than just an academic experiences. You have the extracurricular, you have the life in a residence hall, cultural exchanges, trips, troubles, and all this stuff, and that will all contribute to the personal growth. And so we try to not only emphasize the academic improvement, which they can really do a lot of prep here and of course in study abroad, but we also encourage them to think about how to interact with friends, how to make new friends, how to get adjusted into the new environment, and of course many tiny troubles that multiplies and quadruplies when you go abroad. So how to solve problems, and those are some of the skills that they also need to have in Japan in order for them to get prepared and study abroad. And so what I just talked about is our philosophy of student advising when it comes to study abroad. But it's not just us saying this. There are a lot of research and a study that really states that there are some qualities of study abroad that is outside of academic that's very important. For example, this study that was conducted in 2012 by the Global Human Resources Development Promotion Committee also talks about the necessity of the linguistic ability, but also the communication ability, and also talks about assertiveness, proactiveness, initiatives, take challenges, all those elements that I just talked about in the previous slide. That is more a basis of the human growth.
So how can we measure these abilities? How do we know that students have developed these abilities after study abroad?
Well, that's a good question. Now, we searched for several assessment tools, and on the market there is what we call JAOS or JAOS, Study Abroad Assessment Test, which really fit with our philosophy of study abroad advising. As you can see, it measures 4 global skills that includes communication, problem solving, and they call it global mindedness. I think it's the flexibility. And then the global behavior are the key behaviors that are that will have students be likely to be successful in the classroom. And so those are the four skills that this assessment tool measures, and we thought it was a good fit with our advising style.
So here, the competencies are explained as abilities that lead to success. But what are competencies in the first place? How can we understand what competencies are in this assessment test?
Sure. Okay, so the JAOS study abroad assessment test focuses on the visible competencies. There are 2 major premises. A, the skills or the competencies in the visible domain is directly related to specific behavioral traits. Okay, we'll explain this later. And then number 2, if you want to change the competencies, you need to focus on changing related individual behavioral traits, and that will eventually drive the changes in competencies.
So, yeah, this kind of makes sense, but can you show us an example of how behavioral traits can change or improve competencies?
Sure. Now, for example, let's say there's a competency that you want to increase, and that happens to be a listening ability. Okay, listening ability is said to be tied with these four or more individual behavioral traits. For example, you get affinity. Now, affinity is a term, it's kind of like teamwork oriented versus goal oriented. And so, some people focuses more on goal, but if you want to have adapt listening ability, don't just focus on goal, but focus on process, what others are doing. And so you want to increase that behavioral traits. Changeability is a term that's used, and it's an opposite of stability. So you seek for new ways, new changes, as opposed to being steady and just be on a kind of be a platform. In a listening ability domain, you don't want much change. You want to be stable and you want to basically just take in. So changeability needs to go down. Assertiveness obviously should go down so that it can listen. Now, listening, it requires a lot of energy as well to be patient and to really understand what others are saying. So the thoroughness needs to go up. And so these are just one example of what are some of the behavioral traits that are related to the competencies, and should it go up or should it go down in order for this to go up.
Okay, then let's see how the test actually looks like, how we measure these traits and the competencies.
Okay. So this test is conducted online, whether it's PC or cell phone, either way. And so let's pretend like this is a cell phone screen, and basically you're presented with 4 choices, and it says which one of 4 choices you are likely to engage in. And so you're asked to basically just change the order from the most likely behaviors to the least likely behaviors, and there are 38 questions similar to this.
It kind of looks smart, isn't it? Sometimes when we take a test like this, we could sometimes tell which one is most desirable answer. But when I look at these 4 choices, it's kind of hard to tell which one is most desirable.
That's right. Our students are pretty smart in figuring things out, and like which are the answers that will get them the highest points. And it's not set up like that. As you can see, these are non-judgmental questions. So there are no successful behavior choices in here. It's just it's focused on what you really do and what you're not really what you're capable of doing. So it doesn't use just a Likert scale. So how much do you put in effort? Rank yourself from 1 to 7. It's not that. So here's a sample of what students will receive as an assessment result. Okay. As far as the behavioral traits assessment, there are 20 behavioral traits that are divided into 4 groups. Self-awareness domain, how one perceives themselves, himself, herself. And relatability domain has to do with how people react with others or in a team environment. And then, of course, the responsiveness domain has to do with how you react to outside stimulus, whether it's a trouble, problems. And then lastly, we have 5 behavioral traits in the expressiveness domain, which is how you express yourself outward. And now, in addition to the behavioral traits report, they will get competencies report. Remember, the competencies are a combination of those behavioral traits that we just saw in the previous slides, and combining those behavioral traits generate certain scores in terms of the communication competencies, problem-solving competencies, and global mindedness competencies, the flexibility and the openness. And then finally, the global behavior competencies. Those are the behaviors required to succeed in the university classes overseas. Now, there are a few points of emphasis when we interpret this output report, and when I distribute this to the students, I always go over these 3 points. Number 1, the behavioral traits can be both good and bad, depending on how you display them. For example, you take changeability. Changeability, if it's expressed in a positive way, you seek new ideas, new challenges. If it's displayed in a negative way, that means you get bored quickly and you don't finish you complete your work. So it goes both ways. Number 2, Let's say you get a low score on certain behavioral traits like assertiveness. I have 1 or 2, and students kind of get depressed. Oh yeah, I'm not really good at that. That's not what it means. When you get a low score on these behavioral traits, that means unless you are conscious of activating that traits, it will not show up. So maybe the students might get 1 or 2 in assertiveness, but if he or she goes to a job interview, he has to play the game and he can or she can be assertive. So that's the difference. When you have a low score, that means you gotta be intentional to bring that up. And so the point 3 is kind of summary of 1 and 2. Behavioral traits can and do change if you are intentional in working those traits.
Okay, now let's move on to have a look at how the test has been implemented at Hitotsubashi.
So when we discovered this study abroad assessment test, the first thing we did was to just try it on our 2016 study abroad students at Hitotsubashi during a pre-departure orientation, just to measure what kind of global skills they possess. And as a reminder, the 4 global skills that this test measures are the communication problem solving, global mindedness, and global behaviors. And this graph below shows the results of the pre-departure assessment results among over 10,000 sample that this test has been provided to, and mostly Japanese students. Okay, so we have 50 being the average. As you can see, our student profile clearly shows that communication skills are the lowest and problem solving being the highest. So that really had us focus on perhaps communication skills being their students' goal when they study abroad. And another factor that came into consideration is this graph that we see all the time. It's basically a graph that talks about the qualities that companies seek from the newly graduate college students. And as you can see, communication skills have been at the top of this quality list for the last 13 or 14 years. And so again, communication is needed among our students, and it's the most the quality that's sought by our companies.
So it's interesting because students often ask us, what is the point of going study abroad? Would it be helpful if I go study abroad to get a job?
Mm-hmm.
But it seems that it's not study abroad itself that help, increases their hireability, or
No, absolutely not.
it's something else that they need to improve through study abroad.
Yeah, it's not what you did, but what you have earned through the study abroad experiences that you need to be able to market to the companies. And again, so the communication skills are very important. Okay, so this diagram shows how we're using this assessment test in terms of the students' study abroad experiences. I want to emphasize first, though, that we are implementing the study abroad test not to really do the pre-post comparison, but rather we want to set a goal, communication goal for students so that they can increase their competencies during study abroad. Let me explain. So students take the test prior to the pre-departure orientation online, and they get a feedback, what we just described in the previous slides. After that, students will set a communication goal based on their feedback, one of the competencies that they want to improve during the study abroad. And then when they come back, they will retake the same test to see whether that competency have really increased or not. We haven't done this yet, but we're thinking of ways to remind students during the study abroad time so that he or she can be intentional about increasing that certain competencies. So this is a worksheet to have students think about their study abroad goals as far as communication is concerned. And they have to submit this online in order for them to prove that they have attended our orientation. So during the orientation, they would just write and work on it, and they would go home and think further and submit online, and that becomes their attendance record. Let's take a look here. So let's say a student, this is actually an actual form. that students have gave us the feedback on. So the assertiveness is what she or he selected as the competency that he or she wants to improve. And then there are four things that the students will have to write. Why did you choose assertiveness to be the goal? And so she writes that. And then the students will have to guess or to at least make a logical link between, if you want to increase the assertiveness, what are some of the behavioral traits that you want to work on and why? And then once the behavioral traits are identified, then they are asked to have a plan on how do you want to work on these traits before leaving for the study abroad, as well as once you get overseas, how would you work on improving or just adjusting these traits in order to heighten the assertiveness?
Oh, it's very helpful, isn't it? Because, it's difficult to even be told to improve our communication skills. How can we do that?
Right.
But now you can really be more specific about what kind of communication skill we could improve. And also we could break it down to different specific behavioral traits that we can work on in order to heighten or lower assertiveness.
Right.
In this case, to heighten assertiveness.
Yeah, the thing that we like about this assessment tool is that it really brings it down to the behavioral traits level so that students can easily, devise and implement the action plan. For example, assertiveness, for this person, he or she wants to increase the criticality, the critical thinking, and then thoroughness to be able to follow up on his or her thoughts, and self-efficacy, of course, the confidence in what he or she really says, and then breaks down on how we're going to work on that during your, like 1 year prior to study abroad at Hitotsubashi. You want to think about ideas from various angles, and then you want to back that up by specific examples or concrete examples to support my criticality and thoroughness. And that will probably give him or her the more confidence in what he says, which will increase her or his assertiveness. Now, and the same thing over here when you study abroad, and then of course you're surrounded by perhaps the Western speakers, and so you want to start with the conclusion, summary, and then back that up with the specific examples. And so it really goes down to a very, very feasible level. And that's why we like this worksheet as well as the assessment test.
So it was not our primary goal to have the results, to do the assessment of the students' competencies in the first place. However, we happen to have the results. So now let's have a look at the results and then discuss some implications.
Okay, so here are the demographics of the 192 students who have participated in this pre-post study abroad assessment test. And remember, we are measuring changes in the 4 global skills, and here are the results. As you can see, communication competencies was the only competency that showed statistically significant change, and the 3 remaining competencies did show an upward improvement, but it wasn't statistically significant. So let's take a look in detail of what happened inside of communication competencies. Okay, so the first level of analysis started with dividing the students into 2 groups. Remember, the students had set their own goals in terms of the communication. The communication goals can be divided into 2 groups. The input communication goals, such as listening and empathy and receptiveness, and the other group is the output group, who worked on assertiveness, openness, and presentation ability. And so we compared these 2 groups in terms of where they grew in the communication skills. And the input and output both showed statistically significant growth or change in the goals that they chose. That's the first thing. But the output group, whose improvement was far more significant than the input abilities group.
So did the students choose the the skills that they scored lower? Is that the reason why they improved
Yes.
so much?
Well, they tend to choose the skills with the lower score, so that might have contributed to further growth, and so we noticed that, and so we went to the second round of analysis and we said let's take a look at whether the students had previous overseas experiences versus no overseas experiences and see how the communication skills changed among those two students. And so the next comparison had to do with the students, Japanese students with some prior overseas experience, 1 month or more is how we defined it, versus no previous overseas experiences. And of course, with the international students who are studying at Hitotsubashi is doing another study abroad, who are the most experienced group. And sure enough, the comparison showed that students with no overseas experience did show the most significant change in their output ability, and followed by the students with 1 month or more overseas experiences. And as for the international students, their ability didn't even change. In fact, it slightly decreased, but it wasn't significantly different. So there were no difference. Maybe their skills were already high enough that there wasn't much space to grow for them.
That's possible.
And finally, we took a group of 1 semester study abroad students versus the 2 semester study abroad students and how their input and output abilities have shifted. The first thing that's really obvious, though, is that output ability showed significantly different change, whether it's 1 or 2 semesters, whereas the input ability really did not change a whole lot, regardless of the duration. And number 2, the longer the study abroad period is, the more the output ability changed, which intuitively makes sense, I guess. And so this was not a surprise, but it was more of a confirmation of what we always knew, but it was also it was demonstrated by this assessment test. And so for this 2016 group, the summary is that the output ability showed remarkable growth, especially for those whose goal was to improve on the output communication ability, as well as the first-timer effect, the people who did not have any study abroad experiences. So I guess in a summary, I think we definitely encourage the students with no previous study abroad experience to go there and take advantage of the potential growth that they could earn from that experience. Now, one thing that we need to follow up on this whole system, as mentioned earlier, is that we have not done a reminder of their set goals during the study abroad period. So, the students may forget what the goals were, and so we can't really claim to say that setting a goal was indeed the factor in the change. And so we want to really reinforce students to be reminded of their communication goals through study abroad using Manaba and other systems.
For further details of the study and the assessment test, please check out this article, which you can access through that QR code. Thank you very much for watching.
See ya.